1976, something extraordinary was captured on film by NASA's Viking 1 spacecraft. A colossal face, seemingly carved into the Martian surface, gazing up from the Cydonia region. Officially dismissed as a trick of light. But to some, it was a sign, not of nature, but of intelligence, an ancient civilization, a forgotten empire, and perhaps proof of the Anunnaki. What if Mars was never a lifeless rock? What if it once hosted a thriving, godlike species that later arrived on Earth? This is the story of a buried civilization, and the shocking theory that the Anunnaki left their footprints on Mars. On July 25, 1976, NASA's Viking Orbiter 1 snapped a series of images over Cydonia, a region on the northern plains of Mars. One photo captured what looked eerily like a human face, measuring over 1.5 miles long, with eyes, nose, and mouth. The image instantly sparked debate. Let's look at this groundbreaking finding a little closer. Cydonia was first imaged in detail by the Viking 1 and Viking 2 orbiters. 18 images of the Cydonia region were taken by the orbiters, of which 7 have resolutions better than 250 meters per pixel. The other 11 images have resolutions that are worse than 550 megapixels per pixel and are of limited use for studying surface features. Of the 7 good images, the lighting and time at which 2 pairs of images were taken are so close as to reduce the number to 5 distinct images. In one of the images taken by Viking 1 on July 25, 1976, a 2-kilometer-long, 1.2 miles, Cydonian mesa, situated at 40.75 degrees north latitude and 9.46 degrees west longitude, had the appearance of a humanoid face. When the image was originally acquired, Viking chief scientist Gerald Soffen dismissed the face on Mars in image 035A72 as a trick of light and shadow. A second image, 070A13, also shows the face, and was acquired 35 Viking orbits later at a different sun angle from the 035A72 image. This latter discovery was made independently by Vincent DiPietro and Gregory Molinar, 2 computer engineers at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. DiPietro and Molinar discovered the 2 misfiled images, Viking frames 035A72 and 070A13, while searching through NASA archives. The resolution of these images was about 50 megapixels per pixel. More than 20 years after the Viking 1 images were taken, a succession of spacecraft visited Mars and made new observations of the Cydonia region. These spacecraft have included NASA's Mars Global Surveyor, 1997 to 2006, and Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, 2006-2, and the European Space Agency's Mars Express Probe, 2003, to present. In contrast to the relatively low resolution of the Viking images of Cydonia, these new platforms afford much improved resolution. For instance, the Mars Express images are at a resolution of 14 meters per pixel or better. By combining data from the high-resolution stereo camera, HRSC, on the Mars Express probe and the Mars Orbiter camera, MOC, on board NASA's Mars Global Surveyor, it has been possible to create a 3-dimensional representation of the face on Mars. Since it was originally first imaged, the face has been accepted by scientists as an optical illusion, an example of the psychological phenomenon of pareidolia. After analysis of the higher resolution Mars Global Surveyor data, NASA stated that a detailed analysis of multiple images of this feature reveals a natural-looking Martian hill whose illusory face-like appearance depends on the viewing angle and angle of illumination. One of the activists who is strongly protect the face of Mars theory, Richard Charles Hoagland, born April 25, 1945, is an American author, former science advisor for CBS News, and a proponent of various conspiracy theories about NASA, lost alien civilizations on the Moon, and on Mars, and other related topics. What Hoagland says about NASA's cover-up. Hoagland claims the source of a so-called NASA cover-up with relation to the face on Mars and other related structures, is the result of a report commissioned by NASA authored by the Brookings Institution, the so-called Brookings Report. Hoagland claimed that page 216 of the 1960 report proposed studies on the implications of peaceful space activities for human affairs, instructed NASA to deliberately withhold from the public any evidence it may find of extraterrestrial activity, specifically on the Moon, Mars, or Venus. Hoagland has also proposed a form of physics he calls hyperdimensional physics, which he claims represents a more complete implementation of James Clerk Maxwell's original 20 quaternion equations instead of the original Maxwell's equations as amended by Oliver Heaviside, commonly taught today. Hoagland claims the face on Mars is part of a city built on Cydonia Planitia, consisting of colossal pyramids and mounds arranged in a geometric pattern, indicative of an advanced civilization that once existed on Mars. His book Dark Mission purports to carefully document how NASA has been quite consciously, deliberately and methodically concealing from the American people and the world for all these years the staggering truth that it was not aliens, but rather our own ancestors who, eons ago, lived and built and walked amid that city, emphasis in original, ditto the Moon. Hoagland has claimed to have co-created the Pioneer 10 plaque, a gold-anodized aluminum plaque affixed to the Pioneer 10 spacecraft, launched by NASA in 1972. It was designed to communicate basic information about humans and our location in the galaxy to any extraterrestrial intelligence that might find the spacecraft, with Eric Burgess, as in 1990 when asserting that Carl for many years has been taking public credit for the Pioneer plaque, which of course Eric Burgess and I conceived. Returning to the face of Mars, as we can see, NASA downplayed it, calling it pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in patterns. But independent analysts dug deeper. They found other structures nearby, what looked like pyramids, fortresses, and a city arranged with suspicious symmetry, geometry, alignment, intelligence. Could this face be a monument, a warning, or the last mark of a dying world? The Anunnaki. Ancient Mesopotamian texts described them as gods from the heavens, creators, genetic engineers, beings who descended from the sky to shape early humanity. According to author Zecharia Sitchin, the Anunnaki were not gods, but extraterrestrials from a mysterious planet called Nibiru. We've talked about this planet in our previous videos. They came to Earth to mine gold and resources and allegedly created modern humans as a labor force. But again, we missed some key theories proposed by Zecharia Sitchin and other theory makers. Let's dive deeper into them. Based on the Moon and on Mars, even a colony on Mars, have been in the planning for a long time and are deemed entirely feasible. Sustaining human life and activity on the Moon is certainly challenging, but the studies show how it could be achieved. The tasks are even more challenging for Mars, since resupply from Earth, as the Moon projects envision, is more difficult and costly. Nevertheless, the vital resources needed by man to survive and function are available on Mars, and scientists believe that man could live off the land there. Mars, it has been concluded, is habitable, because it was habitable in the past. Mars appears nowadays as a cold, half-frozen planet, inhospitable to anything living upon its surface. But not so long ago, in geological terms, it was a planet with relatively pleasant seasons, flowing water, oceans and rivers, cloudy, blue skies, and perhaps, just perhaps, even some forms of indigenous simple plant life. All the various studies converge towards the conclusion that Mars is now going through an ice age, not unlike the ice ages that Earth has experienced periodically. Climates on Mars are not that similar to ours. Mr. Sitchin explains the orbital anomalies of planet Earth and how it is affected in its seasons and cycles of ice and warmth. He then continues, "The planet Mars is also subject to all these cycles, except that its larger orbit around the Sun and greater tilt differential cause more extreme climatic swings. The cycle, as we have mentioned, is believed to last some 50,000 years on Mars. When the next Martian warm period, or interglacial, arrives, the planet will literally flow with water, its seasons will not be as harsh, and its atmosphere will not be as alien to Earthlings as it is today. When was the last interglacial epoch on Mars? The time could not have been too distant, because otherwise the dust storms on Mars would have obliterated more, if not most, of the evidence on its surface of once flowing rivers, ocean shorelines, and lake basins, and there would not be as much water vapor still in the Martian atmosphere as is found today. The Martian atmosphere, at first sight inhospitable and even poisonous to man and life, could in fact be a source of vital resources. The atmosphere has been found to contain some water vapor, which could be extracted by condensation. It could also be a source of oxygen for breathing and burning. The planet's reddish-brown or rusty hue is also a clue to the availability of oxygen, for it is the result of the actual rusting of iron rocks on Mars. Before Percival Lowell ever wrote about canals on Mars, astronomers were speculating about Martian civilization. These speculations brought about motifs that became part of the basis for the narratives of Martian civilization. For example, astronomer Elias Kolber in his 1871 star studies. What we know of the universe outside the Earth explained that Mars is adapted as a residence for rational beings like ourselves, and it may be that they have attained to a higher stage of mental development than we have, for the double reason that the planet appears to have been habitable some thousands of years longer than our Earth, and also that the extremes of temperature are greater, the latter stimulating inventive ingenuity, as in a lesser degree than ourselves. Colbert was drawing on now debunked anthropological ideas, which suggested that European civilizations were more advanced because colder temperatures had forced them to become more savvy with technology. This supported the notion that Mars, with a cooler temperature, would have an ancient technological civilization more advanced than that of Earth. The idea that technologically advanced Martians might attack the Earth was made most popular by H.G. Wells's book, War of the Worlds. In it, squid-like aliens in robotic suits devastate the Earth in an attack. Demonstrating the interplay between science and emerging science fiction, Garrett P. Serviss, an American astronomer, wrote a lesser-known, but in its time quite popular, version of a follow-up story to a Martian attack. In Edison's conquest of Mars, Thomas Edison leads the charge to take the fight to the Martians. But let's go back to Sitchin's theories about Anunnaki's presence on Mars as an extraterrestrial civilization. Mr. Sitchin presents several photos of Mars, its pyramids, face, and other features, and opinions of various experts. He continues, although it is said that the NASA scientist who examined the photographs of the face received from the Viking 1 orbiter on July 25, 1976, almost fell out of his chair when he saw this frame and that appropriate "oh my God" or expressions to that effect were uttered. The fact is that the photo was filed away with the thousands of other Viking photographs without any further action, because the similarity to a human face was deemed just a play of light and shadows on a rock eroded by natural forces, water, wind. 3 years later, Vincent DiPietro, an electrical engineer and imaging specialist who remembered seeing the face in a popular magazine, came face to face with the Martian image as he was thumbing through the archives of the National Space Science Data Center. Intrigued by the decision to keep the photo in the Scientific Data Center under that tantalizing caption, "The Head, whose very existence had been denied," he embarked, together with Greg Molinar, a Lockheed computer scientist, on a search for the original NASA image. DiPietro and Molinar found the truth about the face on Mars. They found not one, but two, the other being image 070-A-13, plate F. Subsequent searchers came up with more photos of the Cydonia area taken by different Viking orbiter cameras and from both the right and left sides of the features. There are 11 by now. The face, as well as more pyramid-like and other puzzling features, could be seen on all of them. Using sophisticated computer enhancements and imaging techniques, Di Pietro and Molinar obtained enlarged and clearer images of the face that convinced them it had been artificially sculpted. Armed with their findings, Di Pietro and Molinar, they attended the 1981 The Case for Mars conference, but instead of acclaiming them, the assembled scientists cold-shouldered their assertions, undoubtedly because they would have to draw the conclusion that the face was the handiwork of intelligent beings, Martians, who had inhabited the planet. And that was a totally unacceptable proposition. All they claimed, their book, Unusual Mars Surface Features Epilogue stated, was that the features do not seem natural and warrant further investigation. NASA scientists, however, strongly rejected any suggestion that future missions should include a visit to the face, since it was clearly just a rock shaped by the forces of nature so that it resembled a human face. The cause of the face on Mars was thereafter taken up primarily by Richard C. Hoagland, who we previously mentioned. He organized a computer conference titled the Independent Mars Investigation Team with the purpose of having the features and all other pertinent data studied by a representative group of scientists and specialists. The group eventually included Brian O'Leary, a scientist astronaut, and David Webb, a member of the US President's Space Commission. In their conclusions, they not only concurred with the view that the face and pyramids were artificial structures, they also suggested that other features on the surface on Mars were the handiwork of intelligent beings who had once been on Mars. The most intrigued detail by the suggestion in their reports that the orientation of the face and the principal pyramid indicated they were built about 500,000 years ago in alignment with sunrise at solstice time on Mars. NASA declined everything about the ancient civilization on Mars. The publicity according to the findings of Di Pietro, Molinar, and Hoagland has caused NASA to insist that they are wrong. In an unusual move, the National Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, which supplies the public with copies of NASA data, has been enclosing, along with the face photographs, copies of rebuttals on the unorthodox interpretations of the images. These rebuttals include a 3-page paper dated June 6, 1987, by Paul Butterworth, the center's resident planetologist. He states that there is no reason to believe that this particular mountain, which is similar to tens of thousands of others on the planet, is not the result of the natural geological processes which have produced all the other landforms on Mars. A scientifically significant study by Mark J. Carlotto, an optics scientist, was published in the May 1988 issue of the prestigious journal Applied Optics, and Carlotto's conclusions were that the face was indeed a bisymmetrical human face with another eye socket in the shaded part and a fine structure of the mouth suggesting teeth. These, Carlotto stated, were facial features and not a transient phenomenon or a trick of light and shadow. How the scientist from the USSR proved NASA wrong. Applied Optics deemed the study important enough to make it its front cover feature, and the scientific journal New Scientist devoted a special report to the published paper and to an interview with the author. The journal echoed his suggestion that, at the very least, these enigmatic objects, the face and the adjoining pyramidal features that some had dubbed the city, deserve further scrutiny by future Mars probes, such as the 1988 Soviet Phobos mission or the US Mars Observer. The fact that the controlled Soviet press has published and republished articles by Vladimir Avinsky, a noted researcher in geology and mineralogy, that support the non-natural origin of the monuments, surely indicates the Soviet aerospace attitudes on the matter, a subject that will be dealt with at greater length later on. Avinsky suggests one must bear in mind that due to the low gravity on Mars, a man could perform gigantic tasks on it, and he attaches great importance to the dark circle that is clearly seen in the flat area between the face and the pyramids. While NASA scientists dismiss it as a water spot on the lens of the Viking orbiter, Avinsky considers it the center of the entire composition of the Martian complex and its layout. Unless it is assumed that Earthlings possessed, tens of thousands or even 500,000 years ago, a high civilization and a sophisticated technology that enabled them to engage in space travel, arrive on Mars and, among other things, put up monuments on it, including the face, only two other alternatives logically remain. The first is that intelligent beings had evolved on Mars who not only could engage in megalithic construction, but also happened to look like us. But in the absence even of microorganisms in the soil of Mars, nor evidence of plant and animal life that, among other things, could provide the human-like Martians with nourishment, the rise of a Martian population akin to Earthlings, and one that even duplicated the structure forms found on Earth, seems highly improbable. The only remaining plausible alternative is that someone, neither from Earth nor from Mars, capable of space travel 500,000 years ago, had visited this part of the solar system and had stayed and then left behind monuments, both on Earth and on Mars. The only beings for which evidence has been found, in the Sumerian and biblical texts and in all the ancient mythologies, are the Anunnaki from Nibiru. The Giza Sphinx was so oriented that its gaze was aligned precisely eastward along the 30th parallel toward the spaceport of the Anunnaki in the Sinai Peninsula. The traces of Anunnaki. The reference to the message-transmitting role of the fair of face, the Sphinx at Giza, raises the question of what the purpose of the face on Mars was. Was the purpose, as the Egyptian text suggests, to send the message from heaven to the Sphinx on Earth, a command according to which the gods acted, sent from one face to another fair of face? If such was the purpose of the face on Mars, then one would indeed expect to find pyramids nearby, as one finds at Giza. Interestingly, Dr. Avinsky discerns 3 true pyramids in the area adjoining the face on Mars. As the ample evidence presented in the volumes of the Earth Chronicles series indicates, the Giza pyramids were not the handiwork of pharaohs, but were constructed by the Anunnaki. Mr. Sitchin explains at this point the reasons of the Anunnaki for their facilities in the Sinai Peninsula. Their main aim was to transport the gold mined from southern Africa to Nibiru. The Anunnaki also went to the mountains and plains of South America to exploit the various minerals there, constructing monumental features for the purpose. He then continues, of the unusual features the orbiting cameras captured on the face of Mars, 2 appear to me to be almost certainly artificial, and both seem to emulate structures found on the shore of Lake Titicaca in the Andes. Mr. Sitchin presents a good number of pictures and sketches in his book with its corresponding hypothesis. It has been pointed out that if an alien spacecraft were to search for signs of life on Earth in areas of the Earth's surface outside the cities, what would give the presence of intelligent beings on Earth would be the tracks we call roads and the rectilinear patterns of agricultural lands. NASA itself has supplied what might amount to evidence of deliberate agricultural activity on Mars. Frame 52. A 35 shows a series of parallel grooves resembling contoured farmland, as one would find in the high mountains of Peru's Sacred Valley. Since the Anunnaki counted the planets from the outside inward, Mars was the 6th planet, and the Sumerians depicted it accordingly by the symbol of a 6-pointed star. Using these symbols as a clue, we can now turn to examine an amazing Sumerian depiction on a cylinder seal. It shows a spacecraft with its solar panels and antennas extended, passing between the 6th and the 7th planet, Earth, that is, between Mars and Earth. A winged Anunnaki, by the 7 dots which represent Earth, is greeting another, using a helmet, and by the 6-point star representing Mars. So, if everything is fictional, then we can ask this question. Why was Mars so important to them? And how did they know so much about it? Mars before Earth. Billions of years ago, Mars had water, an atmosphere, magnetic fields, everything a planet needs for life. Then catastrophe. Something tore Mars apart. Radiation, dust storms, and a dying core. But what if, Before that disaster, there was life. Over 2 million years ago, a giant asteroid slammed into Mars, scarring the surface with one massive crater and around 2 billion smaller individual craters. These secondary craters appear across a region of 1,000 miles, 1,800 kilometers, making this asteroid event one of the biggest impacts seen on the red planet in relatively recent history. Asteroids massive enough to create widespread destruction like this are estimated to impact Mars just once every 3 million years. The impact occurred at the equator of Mars in a region humanity has named Elysium Planitia. It left behind a main crater called Corinto. The secondary craters from the impact, on the other hand, range in size from 656 feet to 0.8 miles in diameter and extend outward in a large ray system, according to the scientists behind the results. Despite being 2.3 million years old, the crater and its secondaries, some of which are carved into lava flows originating from the summit of the extinct Martian volcano Elysium Mons, are considered to be extremely young by the scientists. A new study published in 2022 in Nature Astronomy suggests that if life once existed on Mars billions of years ago, the planet could have been host to subterranean microbes that produced methane as a byproduct, known as methanogenic microbes. And since methane is a climate driver, the scientists say, those microbes may have irreversibly damaged the Martian atmosphere, wiping themselves out in the process. Today, the red planet is a cold and barren desert, but extensive observation and exploration has long revealed that the planet was once flowing with rivers, lakes, and maybe even oceans, and therefore was once habitable too. Many believe Mars was home to the Anunnaki, or perhaps one of their colonies. When the planet became uninhabitable, they fled. Earth became their new home, and we their experiment. Could we be the descendants of Martian refugees, the children of a planetary diaspora? Over-ups and whistleblowers. In 2001, NASA returned to Cydonia with the Mars Global Surveyor. The face looked different, blurry, eroded. They said, just a rock. But critics say these new images were manipulated. Whistleblowers claim NASA airbrushes anomalies. Gary McKinnon, a British hacker, claimed to find files about non-terrestrial officers and space fleets. Others say governments know Mars once had life and are hiding it. This whistleblower story is one of the well-known facts that proves the proof of the true existence of the face of Mars, and it's not just an illusion. Who was Solo who hacked NASA? Few months after the World Trade Center attacks, a strange message appeared in the US Army computer. "Your security system is crap," it read. "I am Solo. I will continue to disrupt at the highest levels." Solo scanned thousands of US government machines and discovered glaring security flaws in many of them. Between February 2001 and March 2002, Solo broke into almost 100 PCs within the Army, Navy, Air Force, NASA, and the Department of Defense. He surfed around for months, copying files and passwords. At one point, he brought down the US Army's entire Washington, D.C. network, taking about 2,000 computers out of service for 3 days. But despite his expertise, Solo didn't cover his tracks. He was soon traced to a small apartment in London. In March 2002, the United Kingdom's National High-Tech Crime Unit arrested Gary McKinnon, a quiet 36-year-old Scot with elfin features and Spock-like upswept eyebrows. He'd been a systems administrator, but he didn't have a job at the time of his arrest. He spent his days indulging his obsession with UFOs. In fact, McKinnon claimed that UFOs were the reason for his hack. Convinced that the government was hiding alien anti-gravity devices and advanced energy technologies, he planned to find and release the information for the benefit of humanity. He said his intrusion was detected just as he was downloading a photo from NASA's Johnson Space Center of what he believed to be a UFO. After reading the Hacker's Handbook, the classic 1980s how-to book for computer hackers, McKinnon decided to do a bit of sleuthing himself. Late at night in his darkened bedroom, he began trying out the book's suggested techniques, and in 2000 he decided to look for UFO evidence on the US government's computer systems. McKinnon put his powers of concentration to use, obsessively researching ways to break into the machines. Using the Perl programming language, he wrote a small script that he says allowed him to scan up to 65,000 machines for passwords in under 8 minutes. After dialing up the government systems, he ran the code and made an astonishing discovery. Many federal workers failed to change the default passwords on their computers. "I was amazed at the lack of security," he later told the Daily Mail. On these insecure machines, McKinnon installed a software program called Remotely Anywhere, which allows remote access and control of computers over the internet. McKinnon could then browse through the machines at his leisure and transfer or delete files. Because he was able to monitor all activity on the computers, he could log off the moment he saw anyone else logging on. With his fixation overpowering him, McKinnon surfed through government computers from Fort Meade to NASA's Johnson Space Center in his quest for ET. He claimed he had found a list of the US Navy's non-terrestrial officers, as well as a photo of a cigar-shaped UFO studded with geodesic domes, a photo he couldn't save, he said, because it was in JavaScript. He was arrested in London in 2002 and held briefly in Brixton Prison. But so far, all of the information about the findings on Mars are still strictly confidential. Why the secrecy? What are the scientists afraid we'll find beneath the Martian dust? What lies beneath NASA plans to send humans on a scientific round trip to Mars potentially as early as 2035? The trip will take about 6 to 7 months each way and will cover up to 250 million miles, 402 million kilometers each way. The astronauts may spend as many as 500 days on the planet's surface before returning to Earth. NASA's Artemis program plans to return humans to the Moon this decade to practice and prepare for a Mars mission as early as the 2030s. While NASA has several reasons for pursuing such an ambitious mission, the biggest is scientific exploration and discovery. NASA formed a panel called the Human Exploration of Mars Science Analysis Group to plan the future mission. The scientists and researchers are set to develop and assess the key scientific questions about Mars. They wanted to figure out which research questions required a human mission to address, rather than cheaper robotic missions. The panel came up with recommendations for several important scientific questions for human investigation on Mars. One question asks whether there's life on the planet today. Remember, life on Earth formed about 3.8 billion years ago, when Earth and Mars were similar-looking planets that both had abundant liquid water, and Mars had a denser atmosphere. Another question asks, what sort of environmental changes led Mars to lose the widespread, plentiful liquid water on its surface, as well as some of its atmosphere? How do we get to Mars? To send people to Mars and return them safely to Earth, NASA has developed a new, very powerful launch vehicle called the Space Launch System, and a new human carrier spacecraft called Orion. To prepare and train astronauts for living on and exploring Mars, NASA established a new program to return humans to the Moon, called the Artemis program. In mythology, Artemis was Apollo's twin sister. The Artemis astronauts will live and work on the Moon for months at a time to prepare for living and working on Mars. The Space Launch System and Orion successfully launched on November 16, 2022, as part of the Artemis 1 mission. It made the Artemis program's first uncrewed flight to the Moon, and once there, Orion orbited the Moon for 6 days, getting as close as 80 miles, 129 kilometers, above the surface. Artemis Y splashed back down to Earth on December 11, 2022, after its 1.4 million mile, 2.2 million kilometer maiden journey. Artemis 3, the first mission to return humans to the lunar surface, is scheduled for 2026. The Artemis astronauts will land at the Moon's south pole, where scientists believe there may be large deposits of subsurface water in the form of ice that astronauts could mine, melt, purify, and drink. The Artemis astronauts will set up habitats on the surface of the Moon and spend several months exploring the lunar surface. Since the Moon is a mere 240,000 miles, 386,000 kilometers, from Earth, it will act as a training ground for the future human exploration of Mars. While a Mars mission is still many years out, the Artemis program will help NASA develop the capabilities it needs to explore the Red Planet. Imagine this: astronauts land in Cydonia and uncover a buried chamber, a vault, an artifact, proof of an ancient intelligent species, and a shared ancestry. If the Anunnaki once ruled Mars, and if their remnants still linger, what does that mean for us? So, maybe we aren't just exploring Mars. Maybe we're going home. Subscribe for more forbidden history, ancient mysteries, and galactic secrets they don't want you to know.